Marcus Kane had stopped counting the days a long time ago. The observation deck of the Venture 1 stretched before him like an empty tomb, and he stood there most nights when sleep refused to come. The stars looked the same out here as they did from Earth, he thought, except these stars did not remind him of better times. These stars only reminded him that he was running away, that he had nothing left to run toward. The plague had come suddenly, spreading through the cities like a whispered secret that turned into a scream. Marcus had watched his daughter Sarah fall ill first. She was only 7 years old with dark hair that caught the light like her mother's. Then his wife Michelle got the fever. Then his own body betrayed him. But he survived while they did not. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. It kept the living person and took the ones worth saving. When the lottery selection came for the deep space colonization mission, Marcus had volunteered instantly. He did not care about discovering new worlds or building humanity's future. He only cared about getting away from a world that was empty of meaning. The selection process barely mattered to him. He answered questions honestly and did not pretend to care about the mission objectives. Perhaps they selected him because they could see in his eyes that he had nothing to lose. Or perhaps they thought broken people could be useful for dangerous work. The Venture 1 was one of 3 ships in the mission. The other vessels were the Discovery and the Hope. Together they carried 214 souls into the darkness, searching for a habitable planet that might take 300 years to reach. The voyage itself would last until everyone on board was dead, and their descendants had forgotten what Earth even looked like. Marcus worked in the engineering section, maintaining the life support systems that kept them all alive. It was honest work that did not require conversation. He fixed pipes and checked oxygen levels and monitored the recycling systems that turned human waste into water and food. The work was repetitive and mindless, and that was exactly what he needed. He did not have to think about what he had lost. He only had to think about pressure gauges and filtration cartridges, and whether the algae tanks were producing enough oxygen. The other crew members tried to include him in their social activities at first. They invited him to game nights and exercise sessions and the small parties they held in the common areas. Marcus declined politely and firmly until they stopped asking. They sensed that he carried something heavy, something that could not be fixed by friendly conversation. They left him alone, which was the greatest gift they could have offered. 3 months into the mission, while Marcus was checking the tertiary oxygen recycling unit, alarms started shrieking through the ship. His first thought was that something had failed, that his work had been inadequate and now people would die. He rushed toward the command center, joining the stream of crew members flowing through the corridors in confused panic. Captain Elena Williams was already in the command center when Marcus arrived. She was studying the sensor displays with an expression of confusion and fear. The communication officer, a young woman named Amy, was frantically trying to establish contact with the other 2 ships. Around the room, people were shouting questions, but no one seemed to have any answers. Marcus pushed closer to the sensor display and saw what was happening. Something massive was approaching their position. It was not a ship in any design that humanity had ever created. It was impossibly large, and it was emitting signals that made no sense to the human computers they were using. The captain ordered everyone except essential personnel to return to quarters. She authorized a red alert status, which meant absolutely nothing since the Venture 1 carried no weapons and had no ability to defend itself. The signal continued to intensify. It seemed to be coming from the massive object approaching their position. The communication system crackled, and what emerged from the speakers was a series of mathematical sequences layered over something that almost sounded like music. It was beautiful and terrible and completely incomprehensible. Marcus found himself pulled into the analysis center without anyone actually asking him to go. The head scientist, Dr. Robert Chen, seemed to be grasping at straws to understand what was happening. Marcus had mentioned to him once that he had studied music theory before the world fell apart. And now Chen was asking if Marcus could make sense of the patterns in the alien transmission. He sat down at the computer terminal and listened to the sound over and over again. There was a structure to it, a rhythm beneath the chaos. The mathematical sequences were not random. They were following a pattern, almost like a mathematical proof that was unfolding over time. Marcus began to sketch out the patterns on paper, trying to see the shape of the thing. After hours of work, the computer systems finally managed to translate enough of the signal to display words. The message was simple and direct. The approaching ship came in peace. It requested permission to establish communication. It offered friendship and knowledge to the human vessel. It asked them not to be afraid, but fear had already taken hold of the crew. The captain called an emergency meeting with all senior staff. Marcus attended because Chen had asked him to bring his analysis of the transmission. He sat quietly in the back of the room while the officers debated what to do. Some argued for trying to flee. Others wanted to cut power to everything and hide as if they were dead. A few suggested trying to negotiate. Captain Williams listened to all of them before making her decision. She would respond to the alien transmission with a message of peaceful intent. If this was some kind of trap, then humanity was already caught in it anyway. Running would only postpone the inevitable. Better to face the unknown with dignity than to die cowering in the dark. The Venture 1 broadcast a message back to the approaching vessel. The response came within minutes. The alien ship wanted to send a delegation to establish direct communication. They were requesting permission to dock with the human vessel. Marcus watched from the observation deck as the massive alien ship drew closer and closer. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. The design seemed to flow like water, and its surface caught the light of the nearby star and transformed it into colors that did not have names. It was so different from anything humanity had ever created that it seemed impossible it could be real. The alien vessel deployed a smaller craft that approached the Venture 1 carefully. The docking procedure took several hours, but finally, the ship was secured to the docking ring. Everyone in the ship was holding their breath, waiting to see what would emerge from that alien vessel. 4 figures stepped through the airlock into the human ship. They were tall and graceful, moving with a kind of fluid elegance that made human movement seem clumsy and crude by comparison. Their skin shimmered with colors that shifted in the light, and their faces held a kind of beauty that was so foreign that Marcus could barely process it. They wore no obvious clothing, but their skin seemed to have a texture that suggested protection and design. Their eyes were large and luminous, and when they looked at the gathered crew members, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The leader of the delegation spoke first. Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away, like distant music carried on the wind. She introduced herself as Zara, commander of the Cathani exploration fleet. She said they came from a civilization that had been watching humanity for many centuries. She said they wanted to establish contact because humanity had reached a critical point in its development. She said they had an offer that could change everything for the human race. Marcus listened to every word, and he realized that standing in front of him was a being from another world, another civilization, another way of understanding existence itself. His heart was beating faster than it had in months. For the first time since boarding the Venture 1, Marcus felt something other than despair. He felt curiosity. He felt wonder. He felt alive in a way that he had almost forgotten was possible. Zara explained that the Cathani had established protocols for this exact situation. They had known that humanity would eventually develop the technology to venture into space, and they had prepared for the moment when 2 civilizations would finally meet. The Cathani were offering to share knowledge, technology, and protection. But they also wanted something in return. The captain and the senior staff listened carefully as Zara laid out what the Cathani had discovered about the human race. They said that humans were remarkable in their emotional complexity. Humans could feel joy and despair, love and hatred, hope and desperation, often all at the same time. This emotional capacity made humans unpredictable, but also incredibly creative and resilient. The Cathani, by contrast, had evolved to favor logic and reason above all else. They had built a civilization of extraordinary achievement, but something had been lost in the process. Zara explained that the Cathani had been slowly dying as a species. Their genetic lines were growing weaker with each generation. They had developed medicine and technology to extend their lives artificially, but they could not solve the fundamental problem. Their people no longer felt the need to reproduce naturally. They no longer experienced the driving emotions that made biological reproduction necessary. They had become too logical, too efficient, too disconnected from the forces that created life itself. The Cathani wanted to establish a cultural exchange program. They wanted to study human beings not as specimens or subjects, but as partners. They wanted to learn what made humans capable of feeling so intensely despite their fragility and short lifespans. They believed that understanding human emotion might help them find a way to recover what they had lost. Captain Williams asked the obvious question. What would happen to the humans who participated in this exchange? Zara said they would be treated well and protected. They would be guests, not prisoners. If at any point they wanted to return to the Venture One, they would be allowed to do so without question. But Zara also said that many would probably not want to return. The Cathani had so much to offer. Knowledge that would take humanity centuries to discover on their own. Technology that would make their lives easier and longer. A chance to be part of something greater than themselves. Marcus watched the captain's face carefully. She was trying to decide whether this was a trap or a genuine offer. Finally, she asked how many humans the Cathani wanted for this cultural exchange. Zara said 20 would be ideal. Enough to gather meaningful data, but not so many that the human ship's functions would be compromised. The captain announced that the selection would be voluntary. Anyone willing to spend time aboard the Cathani vessel to help establish communication and cultural understanding was welcome to volunteer. She warned them that this was unknown territory, that anything could happen and that she could not guarantee their safety. She said that volunteering might be the bravest or the most foolish thing they could do. Marcus stepped forward before anyone else spoke. He did not think about it or weigh the options. He simply felt the pull toward something unknown and different, and he let that pull guide him. The captain looked at him with understanding in her eyes. She had watched him move through the ship like a ghost for the past 3 months. She knew that he had nothing holding him to the human vessel. 15 others stepped forward as well. Some were scientists who wanted to understand how the Cathani technology worked. Some were young people who saw this as an adventure. Some, like Marcus, were simply people for whom the current world held no appeal. The captain arranged for the group to be transported to the Cathani vessel in the morning, after medical checks and a night to prepare their minds for what was coming. Marcus returned to his quarters and tried to sleep, but his mind would not settle. He kept thinking about what he would find aboard the alien ship. Would the Cathani treat them badly once they were aboard? Would they perform experiments on the human volunteers? Would they simply study them like insects in a collection? But underneath those fears was something else. A sense of possibility. For the first time in a very long time, Marcus felt like something in his life might matter. He might learn something. He might become part of history. He might, just possibly, find a reason to keep living that was not just about running away from pain. The medical check was quick and efficient. The Cathani doctors examined each human volunteer with scanning devices that seemed to read their bodies from the inside out. Marcus felt no pain or discomfort during the process. When the scanner finished, a Cathani medical officer told him that his neurological patterns were particularly interesting. His stress responses and emotional centers showed signs of recent trauma, but they were still highly active and responsive. This made him valuable for their research. This made him important. The next morning, Marcus and the other 15 volunteers were escorted to the docking bay. They wore special suits that the Cathani had provided, designed to help humans breathe their air and adapt to their ship's environmental systems. As Marcus stepped into the airlock that would carry them to the alien vessel, he took one last look at the Venture One. He wondered if he would ever see it again. He wondered if he would ever want to. The journey through the airlock took only minutes, but it felt like stepping through a doorway between worlds. The Cathani ship's interior was nothing like what Marcus had imagined. Instead of corridors and chambers, the space flowed organically, with walls that seemed to shift and adapt as the humans moved through them. The air tasted different, fresher somehow, and it carried the faint scent of something that reminded Marcus of flowers and rain, though he could not explain why. A delegation of Cathani waited to greet them. They were beautiful in ways that made Marcus feel almost dizzy. Their skin shimmered with subtle colors, and their movements were graceful and fluid. Among them was a Cathani woman who stepped forward to greet Marcus specifically. She was smaller than Zara, her skin a deep shade of twilight blue that seemed to shift to purple in certain lights. Her eyes held 3 lids instead of 2, and when she looked at Marcus, he felt something shift in his chest. She introduced herself as Alira, and she said that she would be responsible for studying Marcus during his time aboard the Cathani vessel. She said that his emotional response patterns were particularly interesting to the Cathani research team. She asked him to follow her to the observation quarters where he would be staying. And as Marcus walked behind her through the flowing corridors of the alien ship, He realized that his old life on Earth and his time on the Venture 1 both felt very far away. This was where he was supposed to be. This was where his second chance was beginning. The quarters assigned to Marcus were comfortable and familiar, designed specifically to accommodate human biology. There was a bed, a workspace, and a window that looked out onto the vast expanse of space. Alira explained that he was free to explore most of the ship, but there were certain areas that were restricted for safety reasons. She said that she would spend time with him each day to study his responses to their environment and their culture. She asked him many questions about Earth and humanity and what he had lost. When he told her about his family, Alira listened carefully, and Marcus could see in her expression something that looked like concern or empathy. She said that losing people you loved was something the Kethani no longer experienced, because their population control was so effective that most of them had never known family bonds in the way humans understood them. She said that Marcus was giving them an opportunity to understand something very important about human existence. He was helping them understand loss and love and grief. Days began to blur together aboard the Kethani ship, which Alira told Marcus was called the Luminescence. The name made sense once Marcus understood how the ship worked. Every surface seemed to glow with soft light that came from within the material itself, and the light changed colors based on the functions being performed in each area. It was beautiful and disorienting, like living inside a dream that made more sense than reality. Alira scheduled sessions with Marcus every morning and evening. During these sessions, she would ask him questions about human emotions, about how he felt in different situations, about what made him happy or sad or angry or afraid. She had devices that monitored his heart rate and neural activity while he talked. She recorded everything, but gradually Marcus realized that her questions were becoming more personal, less clinical. She was not just studying him as a subject anymore. She was genuinely trying to understand him as an individual. During his free time, Marcus explored the luminescence. He discovered that the other human volunteers were scattered throughout the ship, each assigned to different Kethani scientists. He would encounter them in the corridors sometimes and exchange brief conversations. Most of them seemed content or even excited about their situation. The Kethani were treating them well, providing them with food and comfort and access to the ship's databases. One of the other humans, a woman named Victoria, told Marcus that she had been offered a permanent position on the Kethani vessel. They wanted her to teach them about human art and creativity. She said she was seriously considering staying. The Kethani had offered her access to technologies and resources that would have taken Earth humanity thousands of years to develop. She could do things she had never dreamed of doing. Why would she ever want to go back? Marcus began to spend more time on the observation decks watching the stars drift by. The luminescence was traveling at incredible speeds, and Marcus could see things through the viewing ports that no human had ever seen before. There were nebulae that glowed with colors that seemed alive. There were asteroid fields moving in perfect geometric patterns that suggested they were artificial constructs, or at least shaped by intelligence. There were moons orbiting planets so large that they seemed to dwarf everything else in space. One evening, as Marcus was standing alone on an observation deck, Alira found him. She had brought something with her, a device that looked like it was made of crystallized light. She asked Marcus if he wanted to experience something that no human had ever experienced before. Without waiting for an answer, she activated the device. Suddenly, Marcus could see in wavelengths that human eyes were not supposed to see. The universe opened up in front of him in layers and colors and patterns that made his mind feel like it was expanding. He could see the electromagnetic fields that surrounded the luminescence like an aurora. He could see the heat signatures of stars and planets. He could see light that had been traveling through space for millions of years, and he could see where that light was coming from. The experience was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Marcus fell to his knees and Alira caught him before he could fall. When she turned off the device, the normal universe snapped back into place and Marcus felt a profound sense of loss. He had just seen something impossible, something wonderful, and now it was gone. He looked at Alira and he saw something in her expression that surprised him. She looked sad. He asked her why she was sad, and she said that she was experiencing a new emotion. She said that watching Marcus experience that moment of wonder had triggered something in her neurological system that her people had not felt in generations. She said it was something like longing, something like the desire to share joy with another person, something like the beginning of connection. Marcus reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm and it had a texture like silk or water, something that seemed almost liquid in its smoothness. Alira did not pull away. She stood there with her hand in his, and Marcus could see the subtle changes in her skin color, shifts from twilight blue to shades of lavender and soft violet. He realized that he was watching her feel something, watching an alien being experience an emotion that her entire species had forgotten how to feel. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Alira fell into a pattern. During the formal study sessions, they maintained professional distance and Marcus answered her questions about human nature. But during the free time, they would explore the ship together. Alira would show him new things and introduce him to other Cathani scientists and artists. Marcus would teach her about human music and human art, and the things that made human beings feel alive. He taught her to appreciate the visual art form called photography. They spent hours going through the archives of images that the Cathani had collected over centuries of observing different civilizations. Marcus explained to her why certain images affected him emotionally while others did not. He talked about composition and light and the way human artists tried to capture moments of meaning in static images. Alira listened carefully, and then she asked him if he would be willing to teach some of the other Cathani about human art and emotion. She said that Marcus was becoming quite important to their research. His unique combination of recent psychological trauma and high emotional resilience was providing them with insights they had never possessed before. She said that she wanted him to meet some of the other Cathani scientists who were working on understanding human nature. That evening, Alira took Marcus to a gathering of Cathani intellectuals. There were 7 of them in total, all of them women, all of them focused on different aspects of human studies. There was Kira, a pilot and explorer who was fascinated by human courage and the human willingness to take risks. There was Nadira, an engineer who wanted to understand how humans could invent solutions through intuition and emotion rather than pure logic. There was Lyra, a warrior who specialized in conflict resolution and was trying to understand how humans could forgive each other after acts of terrible violence. Each of them wanted to talk to Marcus, to understand him, to learn from his humanity. They had questions about why humans created art, about why humans formed emotional bonds with animals and objects and places, about why humans were willing to die for abstract concepts like honor and justice. Marcus found himself at the center of a circle of curious, intelligent alien women, all of them genuinely interested in what he had to say. He talked about Earth and about the love he had felt for his wife and daughter. He talked about the pain of losing them. He talked about the beauty of sunset over an ocean, and the way music could make him feel things that words could never express. He talked about why humans struggled and suffered and continued trying anyway. The Cathani listened to all of it with an intensity that made Marcus realize how important these conversations were to them. They were not just collecting data. They were learning how to feel again. They were recovering something that their own evolution had taken from them, and they were learning it from him. Weeks turned into months aboard the Luminescence, and Marcus began to lose track of time. The Cathani measured days differently than humans did, using cycles based on the ship's internal systems rather than on the rotation of any planet. He asked Alira how long he had been aboard the ship, and she said it had been approximately 3.7 human months. The calendar on his personal device confirmed it. He had been in space for almost 4 months, and he had only been aboard the Cathani vessel for 1/3 of that time. The idea of returning to the Venture 1 became increasingly strange to Marcus. When he thought about going back to the human ship, he felt a kind of sadness that he could not fully explain. He had begun to belong somewhere. He had begun to matter to people, even if those people were alien. Even if they were beginning to care for him in ways that their species had not cared for anything in generations. Alira noticed his reluctance to discuss return dates. She asked him directly if he wanted to go back to the human vessel. Marcus did not know how to answer. Going back meant returning to a life of maintenance work and quiet isolation. Going back meant leaving behind the first real connection he had felt since losing his family. But staying meant abandoning the last link to his human heritage. One day, Alira brought Marcus to a section of the ship he had not visited before. It was a vast archive of biological information, genetic codes stored in a format that the Cathani had developed over thousands of years. She explained that this was the database that contained the genetic history of her entire species. She showed him records of Cathani evolution, from the time they were simple biological organisms to the current point where they had achieved technological mastery. But there was a problem in their genetic records. Starting about 5,000 years ago, their reproductive rates had begun to decline. Their genetic diversity was decreasing. Their birth rates had fallen to levels that could not sustain their population growth, even with their extended lifespans. They had tried everything. They had modified their biology. They had used genetic engineering to create better matches between breeding partners. They had attempted to artificially synthesize the emotional bonds that drove reproduction in other species. Nothing had worked. The Cathani had become a species that no longer wanted to reproduce biologically. They no longer felt the drives that made life necessary. They had evolved past the need for birth, and in doing so, they had begun to evolve away from life itself. Without new generations being born, they were slowly becoming extinct. Marcus understood the gravity of what Alira was telling him. The Cathani were not just interested in human culture as an academic exercise. They were desperate. They were studying humanity because humans were the opposite of them. Humans wanted to live so badly that they continued creating new generations even when survival was not guaranteed. Humans felt love and passion and connection so deeply that they could not help but reproduce, even knowing that their children would eventually die. The Cathani wanted to understand that impulse. They wanted to recover it in themselves, and they hoped that by studying humans they might find a way to feel it again. Alira took Marcus's hand and told him something that the other Cathani scientists had not yet shared with the human delegation. She said that they wanted to try something unprecedented. They wanted to create a hybrid offspring, a being that was part human and part Cathani, a being that might combine the logical genius of the Cathani with the emotional vitality of humanity. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. He asked her if she was talking about having a child together. Alira said yes. She said that she wanted his genetic material and his emotional influence to create the first hybrid of their species. She said that she wanted to try to feel what reproduction felt like from a human perspective. Marcus did not know what to say. He asked her why she was telling him this. Was this part of the research? Was this something the Cathani had planned for him from the beginning? Alira's skin shifted through several colors as she spoke. She said that initially, yes, the Cathani had selected him because his psychological profile made him a good candidate for this experiment. They had watched how he responded to their environment. They had been interested in his resilience and his capacity to form new emotional attachments. But something had changed during their time together. She had changed. She had begun to feel things that were not part of any research protocol. She had begun to care about him in a way that went far beyond academic interest. She said that she understood if he did not want to participate in creating a hybrid child. She said that she understood if he wanted to return to the human ship and pretend this conversation had never happened. But she also said that she hoped he would consider it. She said that together, they might create something that could save her entire species. Together, they might create a bridge between two worlds. Marcus asked her to give him time to think about it. He spent the next several days in a state of confusion. He wandered through the corridors of the luminescence and spent long hours on the observation decks, staring out into the stars. He thought about Earth. He thought about the daughter he would never have because Sarah had died before she could grow up. He thought about how much he had loved being a father, even though it had been cut short by disease and death. He thought about the universe's cruelty in taking away something so precious, and then offering him this impossible choice. But he also thought about what Alira had said. He thought about the possibility of creating new life. He thought about the idea that his genes and Alira's genes could combine to create a being that had never existed before, a being that would be unique in all of history. He spoke with the other human volunteers about the offer Alira had made. Victoria was jealous. She said that the Cathani had not asked her to participate in something so important. She said that Marcus was being given an opportunity that most humans would never receive. Another volunteer, a young man named Gregory, said that he thought it was a beautiful thing. He said that Marcus would be creating a new kind of life. He would be helping bridge the gap between species. He would be making history. Marcus returned to Alira and told her that he would accept her proposal. He would help create the hybrid child. He would participate in whatever experiments or observations the Cathani wanted to conduct. But he also had one condition. He wanted to be part of raising the child. He wanted to pass on human values and human perspective to this being. If they were going to create something new, something that combined human and Cathani nature, then that child deserved to understand both halves of its identity. Alira agreed to his condition. She said that she had hoped he would want to be involved in raising the child. She said that a being born from such a union would need both perspectives. It would need both parents, both cultures, both ways of understanding the universe. The next morning, Alira took Marcus to meet with the other Cathani scientists. They had heard about his decision, and they had many questions and observations to share. This was going to be important work. This was going to change everything. The process of creating the hybrid child was not what Marcus had expected. The Cathani approached reproduction as they approached everything else, with careful scientific methodology and detailed planning. But there was also something deeply intimate about the process. It was not just about genetic combination. It was about Alira and Marcus making a choice to create life together, and that choice meant something to both of them. The pregnancy was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. Alira's body changed gradually, her skin shifting through colors more dramatically and her movement becoming slower and more deliberate. The other Cathani women gathered around her frequently, and Marcus realized that they were experiencing something together, a kind of collective transition. They were all becoming mothers in a way, or at least they were all becoming responsible for the emergence of new life. Marcus spent hours talking to the developing fetus through Alira's body. He would place his hand on her skin and feel the subtle vibrations as the child grew and developed inside her. He told the child stories about Earth. He told it about mountains and oceans and forests. He told it about his daughter Sarah and how much he had loved her. He told it about human music and human art and human dreams. He told it about pain and loss, but he also told it about hope and love and the reasons why life was worth living, even when it was difficult. Alira listened to everything Marcus said to their child, and she recorded the audio on her devices. She said that the child would need to hear human language and human emotion from the moment of consciousness. She said that the development of the child's neurological systems would be shaped by the sounds and the feelings it experienced in the womb. By talking to the child, Marcus was already beginning to teach it about humanity. The captain of the Venture 1 agreed to allow Marcus to broadcast messages to the child through the communication system that connected the two ships. Marcus recorded himself playing music, singing songs that he barely remembered from his childhood. He talked about historical events and cultural achievements. He talked about the value of human life and the importance of emotional connection. He was trying to make sure that even though this child would be raised by an alien species, it would understand and appreciate its human heritage. The other Cathani women became increasingly involved in preparing for the child's birth. Lyra taught Marcus about Cathani philosophy and the way her people understood existence and meaning. Nadira showed him how Cathani engineering created tools and machines that operated partly on principles that incorporated emotional feedback. Kira took him on high-speed flights through asteroid fields and told him stories about Cathani history and the civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity had even learned to make fire. But the most important preparation came through conversations with Alira. She and Marcus would sit together in the quietest sections of the luminescence, and they would talk about what it meant to create life. Alira explained that the Cathani had not engaged in natural reproduction for so long that most of them had forgotten what it was like to want to create new life. The impulse had become so alien to their thinking that they had to learn it again from scratch. She said that by being with Marcus, by experiencing his emotions and his perspective, she was recovering something that her species had lost. She was beginning to understand what it meant to want to create the future. She was beginning to feel hope about what that future might hold. Marcus asked her if she thought the hybrid child would be considered a citizen of the Cathani civilization or something else. Alira said that was a question the Cathani leadership was still debating. Some argued that the child should have full rights and privileges as a Cathani. Others said that it should belong to both species equally, a bridge between two worlds. A few extreme voices suggested that the hybrid child would be an abomination and should never have been created. But Alira said that she did not care what the leadership decided. She said that this child was going to be important no matter what anyone called it. This child was going to show both species something they had never seen before. This child was going to prove that humans and Cathani could create something beautiful together. The day of the birth came suddenly, even though everyone had been preparing for it. Alira's body underwent rapid changes, and the medical systems of the luminescence began an emergency protocol. Marcus was present in the birthing chamber, holding Alira's hand, feeling her fear and her hope and her pain all mixing together into something he had never experienced before. When the child emerged, Marcus saw something that would change his life forever. The newborn was beautiful and strange and perfect. It had human proportions, but its skin shimmered with Cathani colors. It had human eyes, but they held the brightness and the depth of Cathani intelligence. It had a human cry, but the sound carried harmonic frequencies that only the Cathani could fully appreciate. The child opened its eyes and looked at Marcus, and in that moment, he understood what Alira had been trying to explain. This was not just a hybrid being. This was a future. This was hope given physical form. This was the possibility of two species learning to live together, to understand each other, to create something greater than either of them could create alone. Alira held the child against her body, and her skin glowed with colors of joy and relief, and something that Marcus realized was love. She looked at Marcus and she said his name, and there was so much meaning in that single word that it seemed to contain all the emotion that her species had forgotten how to feel. Over the following weeks and months, other human volunteers began to make their own choices. Some, like Gregory, agreed to participate in hybrid breeding programs. Others decided to return to the Venture 1. The captain allowed them to leave without any conflict. The Cathani understood that not all humans would want to stay, that some would prefer to return to their own kind. But Marcus stayed. He helped raise his daughter with Alira, and the child began to grow and develop in ways that neither pure human nor pure Cathani could have predicted. She learned both languages simultaneously. She understood both ways of thinking and feeling. She was becoming something new, something that had never existed in the universe before. Months turned into years aboard the luminescence. The Cathani discovered that their cultural exchange program was working. More and more of their people began to recover the capacity to feel strong emotions. More and more hybrid children were being born. More and more humans were choosing to stay and help bridge the gap between species. One day, as Marcus stood on an observation deck with his daughter, watching the stars drift by, he realized that he had finally found what he was looking for when he boarded the Venture 1. He had not been looking for a new world. He had been looking for a reason to live. He had been looking for something that mattered. He had been looking for a future that was worth all the pain of the past. His daughter took his hand, and Marcus looked down at this being that was part of him and part of Alira, and part of a new creation. He thought about his wife Michelle and his daughter Sarah, and he realized that they would be proud of what he had become. They would be proud of what he had created. The universe was vast and cold and mostly empty, but in the midst of that emptiness, life had found a way to continue. Love had found a way to bridge the impossible distance between species. Hope had found a way to transform loss into something beautiful and new. And Marcus Kane, who had lost everything on Earth, had finally found his way home among the stars.